Showers of blessing. It's sing along time. May I invite you to stand, please, as we ask God to bless our singing. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of music. We thank you for the blessing you have given those who wrote the words so we can sing. And as we come now, Lord, we ask that you bless us as we sing. In Jesus' name, amen. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we will sing and shout the victory. Let's sing that hymn. Let's go. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansion bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim's pathway, clouds will overspread the skies. But when traveling days are over, not a sun, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of him in glory will the toils of life repair. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Onward to the prize before us, soon the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Thank you very much.
Good night, brethren. Close your eyes, please, while I pray. Heavenly Father, we give thee thanks for the privilege and opportunity to be in your sanctuary once more. We give thee thanks for the blessings, for the words we've heard last night, and tonight we know we'll be hearing from you, Lord, what we need to do in this time of the world when we seem to be heading in the wrong direction in both what we eat and what we drink. Your servant is with us, and we give thee thanks for her. I have never heard anything, Lord, like last night, and I suppose tonight will be even better. So we give thee thanks, and we give thee all the glory for Sister Barbara O'Neill.
Let me use this opportunity to welcome each and every one again to this evening's very special health seminar, Healthy by Choice and Not by Chance. Repeat with me, everyone, healthy by choice and not by chance. Proverbs 26 verse 2 says, the causeless shall not come upon thee, which really means that for every sickness there is a cause. And today we are here to explore and teach as it relates to the message of health. So we welcome you, and I ask you again just to listen to the following announcements. We are going to ask all our visiting friends meaning that you are not a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, to ensure that the package that we give you, that you complete the health survey. Let me give you a look. This is what it looks like. Ensure that you get a health survey and you complete it. On the health survey, you will see some questions as it relates to this seminar and what inspired you most about it. Then you will see for future planning some things that you will share with us that we can address them. Then you'll see community health and wellness education survey as it relates to the community and how we can impact our community through the health message. You will help us because we want to serve you. So please ensure that you fill out this survey. If you are not coming back for the rest of the week, we ask you to complete the survey and hand it to our ushers that are strategically placed at each door. If you are going to come back, we will ask you to keep them until Thursday. We will be collecting all the surveys. Please remember as well that there is a question and answer box coming in through the door, strategically placed right there for you. All your questions, please write them down, place them in that box. We will be having our question and answer segment tomorrow and Thursday. And to close our program on Saturday evening, we will have question and answer again. So write your questions and we will be having our question and answer segment very soon. As well, we want you to know that there will be some very special testimonies of persons who have experienced healing through following the message of health reform. And they'll be sharing with you starting tomorrow, brief testimonies. And so you don't want to miss that. So we invite you to come out early and to ensure that you be a part of what is happening here. Also, to my right on the outside of the wing, you will notice that we have now placed all the DVDs, the books that Barbara O'Neill has, and we also have our colporters with all the nice Seventh-day Adventist books that you would like to know about families, about health. Please view them, please go and look at them. You won't regret it. And so at this time, without any further ado, I will now be inviting Barbara O'Neill to come and present today's presentation as we look forward to a wonderful time with her. Barbara O'Neill, at this time, we invite you to come.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about two very important subjects. That is diabetes, and in my second lecture, I'm going to be talking about heart health. Heart health, it's the number one killer in the world today is heart disease. It's been the number one killer for about 30 years. So obviously, the steps that are being taken to conquer this are not working. And what's the definition of insanity? To keep doing what you've always done and expect different results. But in my first lecture, I want to talk about diabetes. They're calling Alzheimer's now diabetes type 3. And in Australia, there are 1,700 cases of Alzheimer's being diagnosed every week. God never meant the brain to deteriorate. And the reason why Alzheimer's is being called diabetes type 3 is because diabetes is an interference or a disruption or a compromise in glucose delivery to the cell. And when the brain is not getting the glucose that it needs, it basically doesn't run properly. And so the brain is one of the organs that's affected in diabetes. We had one young man do our program, and after completing our program, he had reduced his insulin by about 90%. He went home, and his grandmother contacted me. She said, "Mark visited me. Mark sat and talked to me. Mark's not grumpy anymore." Do you know the word grumpy? Angry, sad. So him controlling his blood sugar levels meant he had a better constitutional, emotional-wise. So you can imagine if the emotions are not regulated, if the emotions aren't being fed properly, then that can contribute to Alzheimer's, because that's what Alzheimer's is? The emotions in the brain aren't working well. So you can see why diabetes type 3 is been saying Alzheimer's. We've got diabetes type 1, diabetes type 2. Diabetes type 1 is usually when the pancreas is so damaged it's not making any insulin or glucagon to control the blood glucose levels, whereas diabetes type 2, it usually happens later in life. And it is acknowledged, even by medicine today, that it is a lifestyle disease. So what I like to look at is I also like to investigate. Remember, we're all to be private investigators, investigating why these things are so. Why is diabetes happening? It has everything to do with the food that we are eating. Because I would like to suggest that 100 years ago, maybe diabetes was very rare on the Jamaican Islands. Because 100 years ago, on the Jamaican Islands, people ate the food that grew on the island. Would I be right? Because you will find that in just about every culture. Is diabetes big in Jamaica today? I went into the supermarket today. Whoa! There's things on those shelves I never heard of the likes. They're all in packages. And I haven't seen any of them growing on the trees here. No. It's got a lot to do with it. And now I want to show you why. And to look at this, we're going to have a look at the main food that people are eating today. No matter where I go in the world, I find that these are the main foods. And it's carbohydrates. Never in the history of mankind have human beings eaten so many of this food group. And I know, living in a rainforest, when my children were little, there was no corner shop. We were 1 hour from the closest shop. So everything that I gave my children, I made. And this carbohydrate list, we didn't eat a lot of because it takes a lot of work if you're going to make it from scratch. So this is cereal. And I know it's a popular food today because every supermarket has a whole aisle devoted to it. Is that right? And ads on television are pushing it, so they're starting to brainwash the children from a young age. And you have a look on the cereal packets, there are all this advertising that's designed to make children want it. Yep. And so the parent's careful not to go down the cereal because there might be a tantrum, yeah, because the child sees and wants. Especially if they watch television, because those images are put into their mind when they're watching television, and they go to the supermarket and they see it and it clicks to them. Be very careful, because there are psychologists and scientists that do this to get your child in. Isn't that incredible? We have a book at home called Serial Killer, and cereal is spelt like that. Serial killer. And he looks at how the grain and the cereal industries go to court defending their right to brainwash American children. That's a bit scary, isn't it? Another carbohydrate that's very popular is bread. Also cakes, biscuits, donuts, so I'll say cakes, etc. Also pies. Do they sell pizza in Jamaica? Oh yes, there's another fast food, another high carbohydrate food, and pasta. I'm a 5th generation Scottish descent. So I didn't even know what pasta was as a child because it was not part of our diet. But I don't think there's a home today without pasta, yeah? Also, rice, that's a high carbohydrate food, and also potatoes. And I'm not talking about your island root vegetables here. I'm talking about what the Fijians called white man's potato, or the English potato, or the Irish potato. Also, last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant. One of the most lethal substances. There was no diabetes on the planet till this was well established. So this is one of the main causes. As we were coming to the church this afternoon, I noticed there was a stand that was selling sugarcane and had little packets of the sugarcane had been peeled and in little lumps. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if the children want something sweet, give them that. It'll take them about half an hour to get through 2 inches, is that right? But that 2 inches, the sugar in that 2 inches, that's going to take them half an hour to fully access it. If you buy them a packet of lollies, even the same size of that sugar cane, it can have 1 or 2 meters of sugar cane in it. Got that? So how did God design that we eat the sugar cane? As it is in the sugar cane. You see, that sugar cane has all the minerals in it, which helps to balance out the sugar, and the fibre in the sugar cane slowly releases the glucose, so it's not a problem. So people don't get diabetes from eating sugar cane. They get diabetes from eating the refined sugar that's extracted out of it. In fact, one writer claimed that a can of Coca-Cola has 10 teaspoons of sugar. That's 10 meters of sugar cane. How long would it take you to eat 10 meters of sugar cane? 3 months, if you didn't break your jaw in the process. So it's this refined acid that's incredibly dangerous. So I haven't written here sugar cane. God made it good, man mucked it up. You see that? Isn't that true in so many cases? In fact, sugar is as closely related to the sugar cane as heroin is to the poppy plant. Nothing wrong with the poppy plant, it's what they extract out of it. Nothing wrong with the sugar cane, it's what they extract out of it. That's the problem. Now I want to show you the effect of these foods inside the body. So in the gastrointestinal tract, all of these foods break down to a singular structure called glucose. And then glucose gets fed into the cell. Now yesterday we went into the cell. Do you remember what I called it? The CBD, Central Business District of the human body. Let's go in there again. Because if you want to know how the body heals, you need to know how it works. If you want to know how it works, you've got to go to the CBD, Central Business District of the body, the inside workings of the cell. So the glucose goes in, and it goes in under the action of insulin. So let's draw our pancreas. Here's pancreas, and the pancreas releases 2 hormones. One is insulin. And this is a good way to remember insulin. Insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. So under the action of the insulin, the glucose gets into the cell. And when the glucose gets into the cell, it goes through a 20-step pathway. And this 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. Isn't that why we eat? To get the glucose to feed the cell. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate is the chemical form of glucose gets fed into what's called the powerhouse. Now, this 8-step pathway is called the powerhouse because of its ability to deliver to us a whopping 36 units of energy. Well, how come a 20-step pathway only gives us 2 units, and how come an 8-step pathway gives us 36? The difference is oxygen. This is called an aerobic pathway because it uses oxygen, whereas this pathway is called anaerobic. So this pathway, being an anaerobic pathway, it produces energy by the process of fermentation. So oxygen makes a huge difference. Last night we talked about cancer. We touched on it. It's a huge subject and it's multifactorial. And cancer cells cannot survive in the presence of oxygen. So a cancer cell basically runs up here, no oxygen. It's a fast pathway, and because it's a fast pathway, it consumes huge amounts of glucose. And we looked at that. In my book, Self-Heal Design, I quote Dr. Otto Warburg, who got a Nobel Prize in 1943 for discovering this, for discovering that cancer cells hate oxygen, they don't use it, and cancer cells consume 15 times the glucose. A man said to me recently, Barbara, have you heard the research coming out of America? A doctor has discovered that cancer cells consume 15 times the glucose and hate oxygen. I said, well, in 1943, Dr. Otto Warburg got a Nobel Prize for that discovery. So let's continue and see what happens to glucose. On a high carbohydrate diet, only so much glucose can be fed through. We've still got a lot left over. And so some of it is stored like a little bunch of grapes. Now this is a very important piece of information for the diabetic, and you will see why. They're called glycogen stores. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores. They're already sitting in the muscle cell, just waiting to be used. And if a person runs out of fuel, all they have to do is get on an exercise bike or do a few push-ups, and the body starts to demand more fuel, which stimulates the body to release the glycogen stores. They're little molecules of glucose already sitting in the muscle cell. So as soon as your body requires it, it plucks it, feeds it through the pathway, plucks it, feeds it through the pathway. It's the diabetic's best kept secret. We had a young man named Dan do our program, diabetic, 19 years of age. He got diabetes at the age of 15 after going on a strong course of antibiotics which damaged the beta cells in his pancreas that make insulin. The first week, he was with us 4 weeks. The first week, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd take a lolly. That would get it up. But it gets it up dramatically fast, and it would always give him a headache because it just got it up too fast. But he was taught if he was low, he's got to do something like that to get it up quickly. I didn't know what he was doing. He told me later. Second week, he was convicted that he should stop those lollies. He heard in the lectures how the sugar gives a quick high, but then a corresponding low. Because when the blood sugar levels go too high, the brain says, quick, pancreas, release insulin. Because remember what insulin does? Insulin's designed to get the blood sugar levels down by putting it into the cell. But because it went too high from the sugar, too much insulin was released. You see, high glucose demands high insulin. So you know what's happening now? Now we're going too low. Too low. That's called hypoglycemia. So when we go too low, then the brain says, stop the insulin, release glucagon. Glucagon's the hormone designed to get the blood sugar levels up again. So that gets the blood sugar level up again. See, the pancreas releases those two hormones which balance those blood sugar levels. But when someone's low, what do? They do what Dan did in the middle of the night, is that right? They grab something sweet. Does that get it up? Oh, yes. But now we're too high. And so quickly the brain says, oh no, stop the glucagon, release the insulin. And then we go too low. Oh no, can you see what's happening? And it's this whiplash that wears out the pancreas. But something else wears out first. The cell wall develops insulin resistance. It's almost as if the inside of the cell says, I'm sick of the sight of you. So it begins to resist the insulin. You've heard of insulin resistance? It's just this high sugar that gets this vicious cycle. So with Dan, first week, he took a lolly in the middle of the night if his blood glucose levels went too low. And by the way, why are they going too low? Because he's still on too much insulin. Second week, he was convicted. He shouldn't do this anymore. So if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd eat an apple. It takes a long time to eat an apple in the middle of the night. Would that get the blood sugar level up? Oh, yes. As soon as that sweet apple's in his mouth's absorbing the glucose even there, the stomach, and it gets it up quite high. Not as high as the lolly. He didn't get the headache. Third week, after hearing these lectures, he did something else. If he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he would get up and do 30 push-ups. Test his blood sugar level, got it up. Where'd that come from? He'd had nothing to eat. When he did push-ups, it stimulated the liver to release his glycogen stores. Just pluck it, feed it through. Pluck it, feed it through. In fact, he said to me on the third week, he said, why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? Do you remember what I called it? The diabetic's best kept secret? It's already in the muscle cell. One morning he woke up and his blood glucose levels were, I think they were about 4. I think about 3 is passing out. Should be about 6.5. Had a glass of water, got dressed, had another glass of water, went to the bathroom, had another glass of water, so he had quite a bit of water. Water is needed to release these. Went on a run up and down our hills at Misty Mountain, came back, tested blood glucose levels, they were 9. And he'd had nothing to eat. Where'd that come from? His glycogen stores. Already sitting in the muscle cell, just waiting to be accessed. No wonder I call it the diabetic's best kept secret. No wonder Dan said to me, why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? He said, I've been a diabetic for 4 years and no one's ever told me about that. I love the Proverbs 14 verse 6. Knowledge is easy to him that understands. So when I explained all of this to me, it made sense. He was a very excited young man. He was on 90 units of insulin a day, that's short and long acting, morning and night. By the time he went home, he was on 10 units of insulin a day. That's after 3 weeks. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? He's told me that his doctor said to him his pancreas was dead. I said, what's dead? Is it gangrene? What's dead? The Bible says in Leviticus 17:11 that the life of the flesh is in the blood. If there's blood going into the pancreas, it's alive and it can be revived. Do you know there's been a death? No one attended the funeral because no one knew he'd died. It was the death of common sense. Am I right? Isn't this what we're appealing to? That's why you're the doctor. Dan became his own doctor. So let's have a look at carbohydrates. This high carbohydrate diet releases a lot of glucose Some of it gets fed through the energy cycles in the cell. For those who know their anatomy and physiology, this is the glycolytic pathway. Comes into the mitochondria where the Krebs cycle is. And that's where the 8-step pathway gives us 36 units of energy because of the presence of oxygen. So notice an important part of Dan's program was his morning exercise. Because when you exercise, you can turn insulin resistant right around. And it's probably not a surprise to you that we gave Dan a low carbohydrate diet, very low. We'll look at that in more detail in a minute. And he exercised. And remember what he did before he exercised? He hydrated his body. Because these two hormones, the body makes them out of water. If you're dehydrated, your pancreas isn't going to be able to make those hormones like it should. And we get back to that acronym. Have you heard of it? New Start. Proper nutrition, exercise, water. That's the first bit. So what does the body do with the high carbohydrate diet when as much as can goes through the energy cycle, and then some is stored as glycogen, but only so much can be stored? What does it do with the rest? It stores it in the most amazing fuel depot in the body. It's called fat cells. And on this high carbohydrate diet, Aussies are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Are Jamaicans getting bigger? I heard on my trip here that 30% of Jamaicans are overweight or obese. Australia, 63%. Whoa. They've overtaken America. What's caused this? It's this high carbohydrate diet. So the third place that this excess glucose gets sent is to the fat stores. I've just been with my daughter in America, and she lives up near Canada. In fact, the morning I left, I had to leave at 3:30 in the morning. My son-in-law, he had to get a scraper and scrape the ice off the windscreen. He said, it'll be not nicer for you in Jamaica. There's no ice on the windscreen here, is there? In fact, the day before I left, the snow started to fall. It is so pretty. So she has a big basement where she has all her stores. So in the kitchen, she's got her kitchen cupboards. And I noticed that some of the jars were running out. I said to her, we're running out of lentils, Emma. We're running out of almonds. So she sends the children down to the basement because that's where the stores are. This is your basement stores here. That's your basement stores. These are your kitchen cupboards, the glycogen stores. So what's happening, and people don't realise this, is on this high carbohydrate diet, releasing a lot of glucose. There's a few things that are happening as a result. One is people are putting on too much weight, and the other is the cells developing insulin resistance, and that eventually develops into diabetes. Because more insulin's released, the brain says, we've got too much glucose in the blood, quick, get it out of the blood. So the insulin gets the glucose out of the blood, puts it into the cell, or stores some as glycogen. Any leftover gets stored as fat. So insulin has a one set mind. I must store, I must store, I must get this glucose out of the blood and into storage. So as you can see by what I've just shown you, fat doesn't make you fat. Are you shocked? Fat doesn't make you fat. What makes you fat? It's the carbs. And you go into the supermarket and you see fat-free yogurt, fat-free products. What have they done? They've taken all, it won't taste any good, so what do they do to make it taste better? Put the sugar in. Now they've got a far worse substance. That's what's going to make you fat. In the book Serial Killer, Alan Watson, he shows that in America, 93% of children eat cereal for breakfast. Would it be like that in Jamaica? And he also shows that by the age of 3, 1 in 3 American children are obese or overweight. And remember what I said? He goes one step further, because what I've given you is just basic science. This is the science. You can go to any anatomy and physiology book and you can read that. It's the carbs. But I want to show you something else, which explains why these carbohydrates are releasing so much glucose, overworking the cell, which eventually wears out the pancreas. Because when there's insulin resistance, there's still glucose in the blood, because the cell's resisting the insulin, so it can't get it into the cell. It can't store it. And so the brain says to the pancreas, we've still got too much glucose in the blood, more insulin, more insulin. You see what's happening? And so now the body, what's it going to do? It starts spilling the glucose out into the urine. Diabetes mellitus means sweet urine. That's one of the signs of diabetes, because the pancreas isn't releasing these hormones properly, and so the glucose isn't getting out of the blood. The Proverb 26 verse 2 states, "The curse causeless shall not come." There is a reason for the diabetes. It is a lifestyle disease. Yes, sugar has to take a large responsibility, and I challenge you to find a packet food in the supermarket that doesn't have sugar. Be careful, sometimes it's called refined carbohydrate, sometimes it's called glucose, sometimes it's called sucrose, but it's there. So what's this other substance that's contributing to it? And these foods here, so wheat, bread, cakes, pies, pizzas, pastas, donuts, cookies, cakes, it's what they're made out of. So look on this carbohydrate list that most of them are made out of this. It's wheat. Am I right? Does Jamaica grow wheat? No. So traditionally the Jamaican people never ate wheat. So what's wrong with wheat? Didn't God make wheat? He did. And he made it very good. But in the 1950s, man changed it. It went through intensive crossbreeding in about in the 1950s. They wanted to produce a plant with a high yield of grain. When I was a little girl, the wheat grew that high. But you go out west now, the wheat grows that high. In fact, we had a wheat farmer's son do our program. He's 25. He was shocked when I said that wheat used to grow that high, because he said, I've never seen wheat that high. It's all this high. Had to be that high because the higher yield in the high plant caused the stalk to break before the wheat was ready to harvest. So they went to go back to the drawing board. They had to come up with a plant that only grew that high with a very thick stem so it could hold the heavy yield. One farmer said to me, my brother, he's a wheat farmer, he gets 6 times more grain per acre. What does that mean to the farmer? 6 times more money per acre? No, they've got to pay their bills. No wonder it's attractive. In 1969, Dr. Norman Bourlag got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat. They did it to help with the starvation crisis in India, in Africa, in Mexico. And no one objects to that. But what was never assessed is the effect of the hybridization of the wheat on the grain and the effect of that on the human. What the hybridization did, it produced a starch called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A is the starch that was produced in the hybridization process. And that amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and then there's a corresponding drop. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B is the starch found in bananas and potatoes. And that doesn't get it up as high, as fast, but it's fairly high. and it's fairly fast. If you're familiar with the glycemic index of foods, anything with a high glycemic index gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. So this is the A, this is the B. C, amylopectin C, that's found in chickpeas, or Americans call it garbanzos. I was in your supermarket today, I saw black-eyed beans, I saw kidney beans, I saw red beans, I saw black beans. You can buy a lot of beans. And those legumes are excellent foods for diabetic. They're excellent foods for everyone. I eat them every day. It's an excellent form of protein. One girl said, I don't like beans. I said, well, which beans don't you like? You can have lentil patties, you can have lentil dal, you can have lentil in tomato sauce with lots of greens. You can have lentils in so many ways. They're just a bean. So it's just the way you grow them. And I know you have an Indian population here, yeah? And that they are very familiar with how to make legumes. If you want to know how to cook legumes, get an Indian vegetarian cookbook. Amazing flavours that they get into their legumes. There's so many things you can do with it. But that amylopectin C, that gives a nice steady rise and a nice steady drop. Every cell in the body wants a delivery of glucose like that. And that's what amylopectin C does, which is in all your legumes. Knowing that, let me go one step further and show you the glycemic index of foods. Now, the glycemic index of foods is an index or a reading on how quickly the glucose is released into the blood. And 55 is basically what's called baseline. So anything under a reading of 55 is low GI, or low glycemic index. Good news for diabetics because it slowly releases the glucose. Anything above 55 is considered high. And that's what the diabetic needs to keep away from to help maintain their blood sugar levels. So cherries sit at about 26, and grapefruit. So grapefruit, it sits at 25. So they're good foods for the diabetic. Some people say, I don't like grapefruit, it's too bitter. Well, bite a seed. If you bite into a seed in the grapefruit, you'll think the grapefruit is sweet because the seed is so bitter. That's all what you compare it to. Where does sugar sit? Sugar sits at 59. That's not a surprise, is it? Where does wheat fit? Well, your refined wheat. So your refined wheat would be your white bread, white pasta, white cereal, white cakes. That sits at 69. You know what that means? A slice of white bread will get the blood sugar level up higher than even a lolly. Why? Because of the amylopectin A. Because of the type of starch that was created in the hybridization process. What about wholemeal? So wholemeal wheat, that's wholemeal bread, wholemeal pasta, wholemeal cereal, that sits at 72. How come? How could that be? Well, because it's not refined, it has more amylopectin A in it. There is a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. And you can get that book, and he has the research and he shows exactly what has happened. Now, when I presented this at one of our health programs, a lady began to cry. I said, why are you crying? She said, I was diagnosed with diabetes 2 years ago. She said, I'm 68. She said, I do everything they tell me. I have wholemeal bread, wholemeal pasta, wholemeal cakes. And every 6 months I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin. She said, I'm not like the lady down the road. She said, the lady down the road, she has cheesecakes and lollies and cakes. He said, I don't do that. And yet every 6 months the doctor puts me on more diabetes, more insulin. She said, I'm crying tears of frustration because I do everything they tell me and I'm getting worse. She said, I'm crying tears of joy because you have just solved the puzzle. It's the wheat. So why don't they tell you that? Well, how much wheat does Australia and America grow? Mountains of the stuff. So sorry, what are they going to tell you? They're not going to shoot themselves in the foot, is that right? And take away one of their biggest industries. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is to start growing some alternatives. Can you get a wheat that has not been hybridized? You can. It's called spelt. Have you heard of spelt? Yeah. One lady said, how do you spell it? Well, that's it. You see, diabetes has been around ever since sugar was refined. But you have a look at this timeline. 1950s, the wheat went through intensive crossbreeding. 1970s, this wheat went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every cereal, bread, cake, pie, pizza, pasta is made out of the hybridized wheat. So all of those products that are in your shops will be made out of the hybridized wheat. This is what has caused the pandemic of diabetes. Never been known. In Australia, 500 new diabetics diagnosed every week. That's out of control. And when the man who discovered insulin, when he found out what they were doing with it, he was alarmed. He said, insulin is not a cure for diabetes, it just manages it. It's not a cure. What is the cure? The cure is to give the body the right conditions so that it begins to make its own insulin and its own glucagon. And if it's given the right conditions, it will. So let me give you another story of a man that came to one of our treats. His name's Bobby. He was 62. He's a very wealthy man in America. And he had diabetes. And recently the doctor took out his lymph nodes in his groin to try and find out why he had diabetes. I can't understand that. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, so maybe one of those people could explain it to me, but it makes no sense to me at all. So when he came to us by plane, his legs swelled up because the lymph nodes were gone. So when he arrived, he was in a wheelchair because he could not walk. He just spent $800 on expensive bandages to put on his legs to try and keep his legs down. So when we consulted, I discovered that he'd spent $1 million on his health in the last 10 years. He said, my doctor has recently sent me home to die. There is nothing more they can do for me. He was on medication for blood pressure, for cholesterol, for blood thinning, for diabetes. So he was on a whole lot of meds. I said to him, you won't need those bandages. He said, I won't. I said, no. We had a little mini trampoline. I said, I want you to go on that for 1 minute every hour. And all he did was this. That's all he could do. And he just held on. Because what that bouncing does is it moves the lymphatic fluid. And that would disperse it from his legs. I said, I don't want you to go on the walks with the guest. I just want you to do smaller walks. I want you to get on the exercise bike because you can't put a lot of weight on those legs. You have to be careful of those legs because the lymph nodes are gone. We put him on a very low carbohydrate diet. So he ate a lot of vegetables, very little fruit. He ate legumes every day. He had nuts and seeds. Every day he could walk a little bit more. Every day the legs went down a little bit more. Every day his blood pressure started to go down. He was with us for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, he dropped his insulin from 90 units of insulin a day down to 10 units a day. Type 1 diabetic. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I am off all my medication. Wow. He said, my doctors are astonished. Do you know, it is our responsibility, our duty to astonish our doctors. Is that right? Yeah. Do your part and show them the power of changing your lifestyle. He said, I ate no wheat and no sugar. He said, I had a very low carbohydrate diet. He said, after 3 months, he'd lost 45 kilos in weight. Now, that's about the size of me. He said, I ate breakfast like a king, I ate lunch like a queen, and I don't eat anything at night. Now, what are a lot of diabetics told to eat? Every 2 hours? To get their blood sugar levels up. But you know what? You've got your stomach, and then after your stomach, you've got your first part of your small intestine. That's where the food's absorbed. So eating every 2 hours, all that really does is disrupt stomach function. Cows can eat all day long because they've got about 5 stomachs. We've only got 1. And later in the week, I'm going to take you on a journey through your gastrointestinal tract, and there you will see. So I'm going to make a list of what Bobby did. Number 1, he had a very low carbohydrate diet. In fact, we would eat together, and he'd show me his plate. He said, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And I said, yes, Bobby, you're doing it right. He also had high fibre, and all plant food has fibre. He had generous protein, so every meal he had some legumes. So your generous protein is your legumes, and your supermarket has a fantastic range, and they're not expensive, whereas your nuts are expensive. Is that right? So just have a little less of them. But I think your pumpkin seeds, your sunflower seeds, those seeds will be a little bit cheaper. And maybe if you've got friends coming from America, they can bring you a packet of nuts. I was talking to one lady, she said, I hardly take any clothes. I just bring back all of these foods that are expensive here. And seeds. There's your, there's the best protein. That's clean burning fuel. It's the best fuel. Meat today, the Bible says the whole creation groans under the curse of sin. You can hardly find a meat today that's not tainted with chemicals. Remember last night I said 80% of antibiotics that are made are given to the animals. And healthy fats. So what would be the best fat to eat in Jamaica? Coconuts, avocados. Because fat doesn't make you fat. And in my next lecture I'll show you that fat doesn't cause heart disease either. We've been spun a lie. And we'll look at why that is so. I mentioned last night a book called The Calcium Lie by Dr. Robert Thompson. He's got a chapter in there. It's called The Cholesterol Lie, The Fat Lie, The Sugar Lie, So how can you know what is truth? Do you remember the 3 things we use? Common sense, history, and science. And I've just given you the science here that shows that is the high carb that is being dumped in our body as the most dangerous form of fat. So there's your nuts, your seeds, and your coconut. They're your best fats. We need fat. We don't need much, but we do need it. So what else? Number 3, breakfast like a king. Now, in the nutrition world today, there is a type of eating that's become very popular. It's called intermittent fasting. Have you heard of it? It's also called time-restricted eating. That's another name for it. And time-restricted eating advocates that we eat 2 meals in a 6-hour period. So today I ate breakfast about, it's about 7 o'clock. And then I ate a meal about, I think it was 1:45. And it is now 25 to 8, 7, 8. I'm not hungry. There's your time-restricted eating, just eating 2 meals in that 6-hour period. And the only way you can do it is to have high fibre, generous protein and healthy fats, because that takes you the distance. You can't do it on a high carbohydrate diet. It gives you quick highs and quick lows. And what they're finding with this time-restricted eating is people are conquering their diabetes, people are conquering their heart disease, people are conquering a whole lot of problems. Time-restricted eating. Dr. Michael Mosley, he's one of the authors of this. He's written a book called Fast Diet. And the fast diet, he looks at the time-restricted eating or the intermittent fasting. He advocates having your first meal at 1 o'clock and then having another meal about 7 o'clock. But the problem is, then you go to bed with a full stomach. We should be fueling up our machinery at the beginning of our journey. What's the beginning of our journey? It's the beginning of the day. I have to tell you that if I didn't have breakfast, by 10 o'clock I'd be failing. And so I suggest do the time-restricted eating, but have your main meal, whatever suits you. A lot of retired couples tell me they eat at 9 and 3. They said that works really well. But if you go to work, you might have to have it a bit earlier and not everyone can eat a substantial meal at lunchtime. So if that is true, and what about school children? What one mother said, she serves the main meal when the children come home from school. So it's actually, you've got to work out what works for you. It's time-restricted eating and fantastic with weight loss. Because if you eat a large meal at the end of the day and go to bed, the body says, what are we going to do with all this glucose? We'll have to send it to the basement stores. There's your fat stores. So breakfast is eaten like a king, and lunch is eaten like a queen. And when I was in Alabama 6 months ago, one lady said to me, I've heard this, but she said, what do paupers eat? I said, nothing. Or very, very little. So if you're not able to have a decent meal at lunchtime, maybe at night you make yourself a smoothie or something like that. You just got to fit and see what works for you. What Bobby also did was he exercised. See, if someone has insulin resistance, if they drop the carbs, stop the wheats and the sugars, and introduce this, and implement a daily exercise program, they can turn insulin resistance around in about 48 hours. That's impressive, isn't it? Because when you exercise, especially when you implement the high-intensity interval training, and in my next lecture I'll explore that in more detail, because that's one of the best ways to strengthen the heart. And as the name implies, it's intervals of very high intensity. Running up a hill, well actually if you get a steep hill, all you have to do is walk up the hill, or push-ups, or exercise bike. Intervals of high intensity and recovery. High intensity, recovery. When you do that high intensity, it increases blood supply to the pancreas. Remember, the life of the flesh is in the blood, more more life. It also causes the cell to develop extra insulin receptor sites, because that cell is crying out for fuel because you're running up a hill. So I said to Bobby, tell me about your exercise program. He said, I cycle 6 miles a day, I swim 30 laps of the pool a day, and I rebound every day. That's the only exercise he can do because he's lost his lymph nodes in his groin. So if he runs or walks too much, the legs swell. It is something he'll ever be managing. What was interesting, he was 62, he went home and his 42-year-old wife said, this is your baby. I'm not interested. I like my champagne and my croissants and my coffee for breakfast. Bobby just continued what he was doing, and after 3 months, she's got a new husband. He's lost 45 kilos. He looks fantastic. In fact, he went back to full-time work. He was looking at retiring. Do you remember what the doctor said? They sent him home and said, we can do no more for you. He's come alive. So when he emailed me after 5 months, he said, I've got some good news. My wife's on the program. You see, she was carrying about 20 kilos excess weight. And no lady likes to carry that. How did he convince her to do it? Was it anything he said? No. It's what he did. It's what he did. And she looked at what was happening to him and she wanted that. And you know what's happening now in her socialite circle? She's got new outfits. She's got a new body. She used to spend a fortune on makeup and jewellery, but that doesn't do it, does it? The beauty comes from within. The beauty comes from a body that works. She's happier. He said she's not having her hissy fits. You've heard of hissy fits? Meltdowns. Because her mind is now settled, because her brain cells are getting the proper fuel. Her girlfriends are saying, what's happened to you? It's very simple. Aren't you glad that God made it simple? There's something else that's absolutely vital. And this is a not negotiable subject. I'm reading a book at the moment called Why We Sleep by a neurologist named Matthew Walker. It was only written 18 months ago. New research on the importance of sleep, not negotiable, 8 hours. You will never heal from any disease unless you're having 8 hours, because that's when the body heals. In fact, the research shows that 10 nights of 6 hours sleep, 50% drop in cognitive ability, 50% drop in your body's functions. That's strong, isn't it? So you've got a choice. You can go to bed at 8 and you can get up at 4. Or you can go to bed at 9 and get up at 5. Or you can go to bed at 10 and get up at 6. I'm giving you a choice. It is true, you could go to bed at 7 and get up at 3, but most people don't choose that option. People aren't sleeping today because of technology, yeah? And the body gets into the habit of not sleeping. The worst thing you can do if you can't sleep is put technology on, because when your eyes see that screen, that blue light gives a message to your brain, daytime, wake up. So you've really got to turn that technology off, those screens off, about an hour before you go to sleep. Aren't you glad that God made it so simple? There's no expensive supplements here, is there? It's just lifestyle. And we have seen incredible turnarounds just by implementing this. Bobby's excited because he's got a new lease on life. And remember how much money had he spent on his health in the last 10 years? $1 million. He said, whoa, I could have come to Misty Mountain for 4 weeks every year for that. And at the retreat, that's what our design is, to teach how the body works, and at the same time you're experiencing it. So it's experimental education, and you have the opportunity to implement this. So what can you have for breakfast? Well, what I had for breakfast this morning was breadfruit and plantain and pawpaw and pineapple and banana and some watermelon. If I was a diabetic, I'd eliminate the watermelon and I'd eliminate the banana. I'd go for your low GI fruits. So a low GI fruit would be your guava, your grapefruits. They're low GI fruits. So what did I have for lunch today? I had a lot of avocado. I think I had nearly half an avocado. But isn't it high in fat? Well, fat doesn't make you fat, remember? Fat's not the problem. What's the problem? It's what's under the avocado. It's all that bread. I had yam, your wild yams. I had some red beans. I had a cabbage salad. So can you see in all that food, I've got high fibre, I've got generous protein, healthy fats, and it takes you the distance. So I trust that you're excited and inspired that the remedy is so simple. And we've seen type 1 and type 2 diabetes recover from their diabetes by doing this. Bobby said to me, anything you tell me to do, I will do. And he was right. And he got the results. He didn't exercise Monday and maybe a little bit Friday. No. He did it. And it's as simple as that. So I look forward to hearing of your amazing results as you implement this and conquer your diabetes. If you don't have diabetes and you implement this, you won't get it. And if you have diabetes and you implement this, you will conquer it. So we're going to have a break now. Let's have a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to have a look at how you can strengthen your heart. And if you have a heart, you should be in this lecture. Thank you.
Yeah. My. Just think of the amount of money we're going to save now, not having to buy all those expensive things that we usually do. You know, it is said we owe something to the generation to come, just as much as we owe to the generation that's past. Someone has paid for Barbara to come. That's the generation that's past. But we also need to prepare for the generation to come. That means that we have to put something in the kitty so that we can, for the generation to come, they can hear the same good news that you are hearing. We have decided that we wouldn't charge any money for entry, for coming in, because we want everybody to come and hear the good news, whether you can afford $1,000 or just $10. And so we would like you to give generously to the cause, so that not only we can defray the current expenses, but we can look forward to the generation to come and try and help them, make something for them so that they too can have the sort of teaching that we've been having. So tonight, as it said that our wallets contain some seeds. As you scatter seeds, the seeds grow, they germinate, they grow, and they bear fruit. Well, your wallets contain a lot of seeds. And if you sow some of them tonight. Those too will germinate so that you too can benefit from them later on. So as the ushers come around, please be generous so that we can help future generation, not just this generation. Ushers, please. Shall we pray? Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the gift that you give to us. We thank you that you have enabled Barbara to come all the way from Australia, to come to teach us how we should care for our bodies. And we thank you for what we have been hearing. Not only will they be a benefit to our bodies, but it will also be a benefit to our pockets. So we ask God to bless in Jesus' name.
Jesus, you are my joy within. You are the shelter from the wind. You're the forgiver of my sins. Jesus, you are, yeah. Where can I go? Who can I call? Who's there to catch me when I fall? Your hands, they hold me through it all. Everything I need, you are. Jesus, you are my cornerstone. You are my friend when I'm alone. You're the convictor when I'm wrong.
Welcome back, everyone. And thank you for that amazing singing. The Bible says in Proverbs 4:23, keep the heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. The issues of life is the blood, and every single cell in the body is fed by the blood. So why is the blood called the life? Well, scientifically, let's analyze the blood. The blood contains oxygen. It carries the oxygen. The blood carries the nutrients. The blood carries the water. And as the blood carries these to the cell, it carries away the waste products from the cell. Because as glucose and oxygen is combusted in the cell, it gives off waste. That's why it's called the life of the flesh. In Australia, we have a lot of sheep. Way out west, there are properties that have got 10,000 acres. They have thousands of sheep. And it's very hard for the farmer to keep his eye on every sheep. And they have thick woolly tails. And what can happen is the waste coming out underneath the tail, if it's not cleaned off, the blowflies can land there and the maggots, and it's called fly blown. And he can lose his sheep because of that. So what they do is they cut the tails off. And when they cut the tails off, then that area is to the sun and the air, and they don't get fly blown. So what they do when the little lamb is about a couple of weeks old, they put a rubber ring around the base of the tail. And when they put the rubber ring around the base of the tail, that stops blood going into the tail. And it's not long before the tail falls off. When you've got thousands of sheep, it's the easiest thing to do. But that tail dies because there's no blood going into it. That's why it's true what the Bible says, that the blood is the life of the flesh. But what's happening today is the vessels that carry the blood are getting all blocked up. It's called atherosclerosis, and it's the number one killer in the world today. The number one killer is heart disease or stroke, because those blood vessels are getting all blocked up. So what blocks them up? We are told it's cholesterol, is that right? Or saturated fat. And you've probably been told, stop the coconut, it's a saturated fat, it's going to give you heart disease. Well, did it kill your ancestors? Your ancestors that ate coconut every single meal. It didn't kill them, did it? In fact, they didn't have heart disease. So can you see what I mean? You've got your history, and your history shows that it's not the coconut. The coconut's not the problem. The coconut is an amazing fat. So let me give you the cholesterol story. And everything that I give you, I can back it up with science. So what I endeavour to give you is truth. And truth doesn't change. Whether most people in the world don't believe it doesn't change the truth, does it? Truth is just truth. It's fact. So here's your liver. And your liver makes cholesterol. And cholesterol is a very important lipid or fat in the body. And the liver makes cholesterol according to the body's demand. In fact, one writer called cholesterol the Band-Aid. It protects the cells. It's very important. And 80% of the cholesterol that your body makes is made from glucose. And 20% of the cholesterol that our body makes is made from fat. Now that one piece of information alone tells you it's not the butter on the bread that's the problem, it's the bread under the butter. That's the problem. So we've got two main types of cholesterol. We've got HDL, high density lipoprotein, and it's called the good guy. And it's called the good guy because it carries excess cholesterol out of the blood and back to the liver. The other type of cholesterol is LDL, low-density lipoprotein. It's called the bad guy. But remember, the body doesn't make anything bad. So what is LDL's role in the body? Its role is that of a repairer and a rebuilder. But LDL does something else, and this is important. LDL delivers cholesterol to the brain, and the brain loves cholesterol. You see, 50% of the membrane around every cell is fat. So let's have a look at our cell again. 50% of the membrane around every cell is fat. 50% of the membrane around every cell, that's the membrane, is protein. Another reason why these are two of the essential ingredients that the body requires, but not the brain cell. This is what the brain cell looks like, and we've got 1 trillion of these. These are the little receiving stations. This is the arm that comes out of the cell. You see the nerve cells communicate via little chemical messengers. The little chemical messengers come in, they're encapsulated, and they go down the arm into the boutons, and they're released out to the next nerve cell. The membrane around the nerve cell in the brain is 70% fat. The brain is the fattiest organ in the body, and I think this fat-free diet that people have been told to eat, what, about 30 years ago now, I think it's a contributing factor to the mental illness we're seeing, because your brain cannot function without fat. And the food that has the highest cholesterol levels, the highest saturated fat, is breast milk in the first month of life. Are babies having heart attacks? Are babies having strokes? And yet they're having high cholesterol foods. God designed that breast milk to have high saturated fat, high cholesterol, because that developing brain must have fat. We had a midwife do our program. She's about 80. She worked in Africa for a while, and she said they found that African babies weren't developing mentally properly. And when they investigated, the mothers were watering down the powdered milk so that babies weren't getting enough fat. So their brains weren't developing properly. In fact, what they found, that this myelin sheath, that's called the myelin sheath, and it's basically fat, cholesterol fat, it wasn't developing because the babies weren't getting enough fat. See, the mothers were watering down the powdered milk to make it last a little bit longer. It's just criminal that these milk companies go in and they use the media to make the women think that it's better to put their babies on the formula than to breastfeed. I breastfed all my babies. It is so easy. It is so cheap. I can't understand why it's not done. And I never had sleepless nights because I just slept with my baby. If they woke up, I stuck them on. I don't know when they went back because I went to sleep before them. Easy parenting. So LDL, rather than being the enemy, can you see how important it is? So let's have a look at the blood vessel. I'll get a red to show this. So here's the blood vessel. And because of its low density, LDL is on the edge. And because of its high density, HDL is in the middle. We have a book in our library at home called Put Your Heart in Your Mouth by Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride. And she spends the first 3 chapters of her book showing all the things that damage the arterial wall, environmental poisons, and we are so exposed to these environmental poisons. Have you been investigating what you're washing your hands with, what you're washing your clothes with, what you're washing your dishes with? They've all got chemicals in them, chemicals in the food. All those colourful packets I saw lining the supermarket shelf, they would all have chemicals in them. artificial flavourings, artificial colourings, artificial sweeteners. They damage the arterial wall. What also damages the arterial wall is not only environmental poisons and the chemicals, which are basically everywhere, but also mould. Have you investigated your house? There should be no mould in your house. Open the windows, let the sunshine come in, get the fans on, rip up the carpets, throw them to the tip. You have tips? Rubbish place. Yeah. Because I tell you what, carpets are a breeding ground for disease. Especially if they get damp, that's when the mould starts. Mould can damage when it gets into the blood. Also mercury, we can be exposed to mercury by silver fillings in the teeth, we can be exposed to mercury in fish, we can be exposed to mercury by the flu vaccine. If the human body is designed to heal itself, you don't need to vaccinate it. Did God make a mistake when he made the body? No. My sister's a science teacher, and when she teaches immunology, when she's finished, she says to the students, see, the body's designed to heal itself. It'll heal itself if you give it the right conditions, as you saw in my last lecture with diabetes. So all of these chemicals and environmental poisons, moles, they're damaging the endothelium cells, which are the cells that line the artery. And so what does the body do now to repair that damage? Who does it send? LDL. It's already on the edge, ready to plug up the hole. But the person doesn't realise that the mouldy house is killing them. They don't realise that all the chemicals they're exposed to in their detergents, in their washing the dishes with, what they're cleaning their teeth with, are damaging them. And so the damage continues and the build-up continues. It's called atherosclerosis. But something else is happening. On this high carbohydrate diet, releasing a lot of glucose, you've got a lot of glucose in the blood. And what that excess glucose does is it connects with protein molecules and it becomes sticky. And what they do is they stick to the walls of the arteries. So let's say we've got a very narrow area here and one of these dislodges floats down and gets stuck. That is the number one cause of a stroke or a heart disease. I have 5 books. The Great Cholesterol Deception by Dr. Peter Dingle. The Great Cholesterol Con by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick is a cardiovascular surgeon, and he's scathing on this myth, this misconception that cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease, because they don't. In fact, in his book said, there is no proof. No proof. Now that's shocking, isn't it? In fact, Jesus told us exactly where it's coming from. And in John 8:44, he said to his accusers, he said, ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of the father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he abode not in the truth, because there was no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. I love the way the Bible sweeps the curtain aside. And you look behind the scenes and you see where this trouble is coming from. But he uses a lie that is far more effective than lying. It's called deception. And in Revelation 12, verse 9, it says, and that old serpent, that great dragon, the devil, Satan, was cast out, which deceives the whole world. He deceives. It's a deception. That's why you're the doctor. Work it out. Weigh these things up and you make the decision what you will do for your body. It's a deception. So Dr. Malcolm Kendrick is a cardiovascular surgeon performing bypass operations, and he has patients who have heart attacks with low cholesterol levels. He says it's never been proven. I'm not a doctor, but he is. And then there's Dr. Dwight Lundell. He's written an ebook called The Great Cholesterol Lie. He's performed 10,000 bypasses. And then you've also got Johnny Bowden, who wrote the book The Great Cholesterol Myth. There's another book called The Great Cholesterol Hoax. We're running out of words. It's a lie. It's a deception. To say that cholesterol causes heart disease is like saying that fire trucks are causing the fire. Well, they must. They're always at the fire. It's like blaming every accident on the ambulance. Well, they must be causing it because they're the one common denominator. Have you noticed? Do you take your 6 trusty serving men everywhere you go? Remember Rudyard Kipling wrote the poem, I have 6 trusty serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what, why, where, when, how, and who. Investigate. Investigate. Don't stop till you know, till you see it. And then as you implement it in your life, isn't that your most powerful testimony? It worked for me. And if someone says to me, it couldn't possibly have worked, who do you listen to? So cholesterol and saturated fat don't cause heart disease. What causes heart disease? It's damage to the arterial wall. That's what causes heart disease. So can you clear that up? Absolutely. How do you clear it up? You stop what causes it. In page 127 of the Ministry of Healing, Ellen White says, in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. Go through your house and get all the chemicals out. But what are we going to clean our bathroom with? Vinegar. It's cheaper than bleach. And it won't kill you like bleach will. Sodium bicarbonate powder. How cheap is that? Little packet in the supermarket. You know what's exciting? You put a little mound of sodium bicarbonate on the bottom of your bath, your shower, pour a little bit of vinegar on it, and it'll fizz up. You get this great little chemical reaction. The kids love it. And then put your scrubbing brush in and scrub. You clean your bathroom every week. It really doesn't get dirty. What can you wash your hair with? Sodium bicarbonate. What can you clean your teeth with? Sodium bicarbonate. Traditionally, a lot of cultures used to clean their teeth with powdered charcoal. Doesn't it make your teeth black? Oh, at first, but then they become really white. Because little by little, like the dripping tap on a stone, these things are killing us. What can you wash your clothes with? Sodium bicarbonate. How cheap is that? In Australia, you can go to the produce store and get 20 kilos for $20. How cheap is that? But I like my clothes to have a nice smell in them. We'll put a few drops of eucalyptus oil, put a few drops of lavender oil in it. Because when you use chemicals to wash your clothes, when you wear them and you get hot, which you do here in Jamaica, and your pores open, you can be absorbing chemicals out of your clothes. We've got to investigate, find out all the areas that these things come in. So how do we turn this around? You will find that the list I give you is very similar to the list I just gave you. So number 1, you've got to stop. You've got to stop all the things that are contributing to the breaking down of the arterial wall. Stop chemicals. You've got to investigate if there's any mold. Stop chemical exposure, stop mold exposure, stop wheat. Stop the refined sugar, because remember, the wheat and the refined sugar are putting too much glucose in your blood. It connects with those protein molecules and becomes sticky. And that's what contributes to the blockage. Number 2, high fibre diet. High fibre. Now what that fibre does, the highest fibre foods is your vegetables. And in your vegetable kingdom, one of the highest fibres is your root veggies. Thank you, just a bit of an adjustment there. So your highest fibre food are your vegetables. That's better, isn't it? Your highest fibre food are your vegetables, but the greens are releasing something very interesting that cleanses the blood. So your greens have a blood in them that's green. It's called chlorophyll, yeah? And this is what human blood looks like. And this is what plant blood looks like. So human blood, the only difference is that the middle molecule is iron. But with plant blood, the middle molecule is magnesium. So your greens give a wonderful cleansing action to your blood. And that cleansing action helps to cleanse the blood. So your fibre, vegetables. There's no limit on your vegetables. Most people don't eat enough vegetables. So these are your root vegetables, your island greens, your pumpkins, so your whites and your yellows and your greens. We should be eating something green every day. And the good news is that when you cook your vegetables, you don't lose your minerals. Generous proteins. Those cells that make up the walls of your cells are mostly made out of protein. Remember, the membrane around every cell is 50% protein, and the new cell is built up by protein. Protein's very important. I find a lot of vegetarians are protein deficient because they're not eating enough protein. So there's your beans, your legumes, your nuts and your seeds. But also your fats, so your healthy fats. And the healthy fats are absolutely important because every cell in the body, and this is every cell that makes up your heart muscle, is 50% protein and 50% fat. Fat doesn't make you fat. Fat doesn't clog up your arteries. I do a live blood analysis, well I used to when I worked at our retreat, and the only time I saw blood cells clumping together is when the person's dehydrated. 1 cup of coffee, 1 cup of coffee. 1 cup of coffee, of course no one here drinks 5 cups of coffee, I'm sure. But 1 cup of coffee requires 5 glasses of water to make up the dehydrating agents in a cup of coffee. And when you consider that, most people in the world today are dehydrated. And when the body says, keep the heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life, that water is required to thin the blood. So number 3, how many people have a heart attack and they put on blood thinners, yeah? To keep that blood thin, because it's a lot easier for the heart to pump nice thin blood. So your best blood thinner is water. And that must be 8+ glasses a day. The more you perspire, the more water you need. So we'll just make sure we've got that coconut for the healthy fats. Also salt. Now if someone's had heart attack, are they told to stop the salt? But there is a salt that is dangerous and they must stop, and that is the salt that you buy on the supermarket shelf. So let me give you the salt story. So seawater. Your island is surrounded by seawater, yeah? And Dr. Robert Thompson, in his book, The Calcium Lie, he says the clearest indicator of a creator God is seawater. Because seawater has the exact same mineral balance and proportion as is found in body fluids, in the blood, in the bones, and we need those minerals. So seawater contains 92 minerals in the exact balance and proportion as is found in the body. That's why it's called an isotonic solution. And in the war, if you're in the Navy and needed a blood transfusion, they transfuse you with seawater. Because very quickly the body converts that seawater to blood. Of that seawater, 30% of those minerals are made up of sodium. Now, this one piece of information alone tells us how we should be having our sodium. We should be having it in its balanced form with all the other minerals. The Bible talks about salt. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, Jesus said, "Ye are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men." Wow. How does the salt lose its savour? Well, table salt, which is found on the supermarket shelf, which unfortunately is often called sea salt, only has 2 minerals. What are the 2 minerals? One is sodium and one is chloride. And of those 92 minerals, 50% is chloride. So because they make up the largest amount, they're the first crystals formed. So what man does is he just scoops up those first 2 crystals, bleaches it white, puts aluminium with it, and calls it table salt, and sometimes even has the hide to call it sea salt. What did the Bible say? If the salt has lost its savour. I'd like to suggest that this salt has lost its savour. It's lost all the other minerals. What does the Bible say next? It is now good for nothing, but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. The doctor is right. That salt will contribute to high blood pressure because around every cell there's a bilayered membrane. And the largest concentration of mineral inside the cell is potassium, and you get your potassium in all your fresh fruit and vegetables. The highest concentration outside of the cell is sodium, and there are sodium-potassium pumps in that membrane, and they're constantly going like this, keeping the balance in and out of the cell. Our body runs according to precision balance. So when someone's not having any fruit and vegetables, and I consulted with a young woman recently who eats no fruit and vegetables. Isn't that incredible? It's just all of this. Huh? Isn't that a vegetable? Well, it is, but that's a very small part. And so her potassium levels would be very low. And she's eating a lot of fast food, which would have a lot of this salt in it. So what's happening is potassium levels start to drop and sodium levels inside the cell start to rise, and some of that sodium starts to merge in because of the process of osmosis diffusion when the highest concentration merges into the lowest. So when sodium levels rise inside the cell, that causes the cell to swell. There's your high blood pressure. So what do? You can use Celtic salt, which is what we do. And I don't know if it's easy to get here. It has 82 minerals. But I do know that a salt that's a lot easier for you to get is the Himalayan salt. And Himalayan salt has 75 minerals, so it's still pretty close. Or you can just go to the sea and gather bottles of seawater. Just don't gather it near a sewage outfall. Go to where it's a bit purer. That's a bit of common sense, isn't it? And that seawater has 92 minerals. So how do you use it? If you use it in your cooking, 1 cup of seawater is equal to a teaspoon of salt. So you can use it like that. And the flavour is amazing because of all the minerals. How cheap is that? And because it's seawater, you can have it in bottles in your basement cupboard or your cool cupboard, and it doesn't go off because it's got so many minerals in it. It's all about the minerals. The minerals glue us together. Minerals are vital. The problem